The siege of Jerusalem was a massive military endeavor the likes of which had not been seen since the fall of Carthage 2 centuries earlier. Starting in April of 70 AD and lasting nearly 5 months, the battle would be a brutal, no-holds-barred brawl fought over every inch of the city. At stake was the success of the Great Revolt in Judea and the survival of the Jewish people. Roman involvement in Judea first began in 63 BC when Pompey the Great was drawn into a Jewish civil war, and eventually seized Jerusalem. However, the region saw much turbulence during the final years of the Republic and was taken over by the Parthians, before legions returned to install the puppet king Herod. Eventually, a series of procurators oversaw Judea, but these largely lacked the competency or military power to impose order. Roman authority was highly dependent on local elites who themselves often lacked the confidence or respect of the Jewish people. On top of this, the population of Judea was divided across lines of class, ethnic, and religious divisions. As a result, the region was highly unstable. Revolutions seemed perpetually around the corner. In May of 66 AD, rioting amongst the people was met by the heavy-handed overreaction of the Roman procurator Florus, who only further incensed the situation by plundering southwest Jerusalem and killing 3,600 people. As the situation escalated, reinforcements soon arrived from Caesarea, only to be driven out by a rebellion that now spread to the entire region. Jerusalem was taken by Jewish rebels, while Roman strongholds were eliminated in Judea and Perea. Roman efforts to combat the uprising were led by Vespasian and his son Titus, under orders from the Emperor Nero. The campaign season of 67 AD saw Vespasian advance south from Antioch and focus his efforts on subduing Galilee. Field battles were virtually unheard of, given the huge advantage the Romans held, and most of the fighting was concentrated around fortifications. This resulted in particularly brutal treatment of any populations which did not submit immediately. Rome often acted particularly strict to make a point. During the 68 AD offensive in Judea, for instance, cities downstream of the Roman army learned of their approach not by messengers, but by the arrival of bodies floating down the Jordan River. The campaign ground to a halt with the news of Nero's death. The anarchy that followed was known as the Year of Four Emperors and included a bid for power by Vespasian on July 1st, 69 AD. By the summer of 70 AD, he had come out the victor and set sail for Rome to claim his prize. Titus was left in command of the Judean campaign with instructions to put an end to the Jewish uprising. This, of course, meant the long-delayed assault on Jerusalem, home to the rebel leaders and the heart of the resistance. Titus led both the 12th and 15th legions by the most direct road, while the 5th Macedonica approached via Emmaus, and the 10th Fretensis approached via Jericho. On April 23rd, the lead units of the 12th and 15th legions arrived on the hills to the north of the city. That night, the 5th Macedonica arrived, and by morning, the rest of the army entered the battlefield. Before them lay the great city with gleaming temples and stout battlements. The city of Jerusalem is surrounded on 3 sides by steep ravines. To the east lies the Kidron Valley, to the west the Gihon Valley, and sweeping around the south is the Hinnom Valley. A series of hills surround the area, including the famed Mount of Olives to the east. Ancient Jerusalem itself was built atop several key topographic features. The city incorporated 2 spurs of land with the Tyropaean Valley in between. Atop the eastern spur stood the Temple Mount and the Antonia Fortress. The heights of the western spur were occupied by the elites who had built the upper city during the Hashmonean and Herodian periods. In the middle of these 2 areas sprawled the more ancient and crowded lower city, which held most of the population. Both the upper and lower cities were enclosed by a wall, which was anchored on the flank by the massive fortifications around the Temple Mount. Inevitably, the population outgrew its bounds, and the second city was developed north of the first wall. This exposed position was soon surrounded by a second wall, which ran from the Antonia in the east to the Genoth Gate in the west. By the 1st century AD, yet another suburb had sprung up to the north, known as the New City. Once again, expansion necessitated fortifications, and in 41 AD, Herod Agrippa commissioned the construction of the third wall. This was an ambitious project with massive stone blocks meant to enclose a large area. It seems that the scale of the defensive works raised some suspicion amongst the Romans, who forced their client king to abandon the project before its completion. Over the course of the Jewish Revolt, however, the people of Jerusalem managed to put the finishing touches on their third layer of battlements. By the time the legions arrived outside Jerusalem, the walls had been raised an additional 9 meters and a series of square towers were built projecting outwards. The combination of tough terrain and stout walls made for a formidable 3-layered defensive network. Additionally, the maze of narrow streets between the fortifications could be easily blockaded, while numerous underground water and sewage passages meant that defenders could emerge from any direction for a surprise attack on intruders. While the destruction of Jerusalem ended the organized resistance of Jewish forces, the fires of revolution still burned in the fringes of Judea, where the die-hard rebels holed up in fortresses refused to surrender. When Titus set sail for Rome in 71 AD, he left the new military governor, Lucilius Bassus, to conduct mopping up operations. Bassus took command of the 10th Fretensis Legion and marched first on the garrison at Herodium, followed swiftly by Hebron. He then swung the legions around the east side of the Dead Sea to take the hill fortress of Machaerus, before returning west to destroy 3,000 rebels hiding in the forest of Jardis in the Jordan Valley. Now, only the stronghold of Masada remained. However, Bassus soon died of natural causes, and the legion returned to its new base at Jerusalem, before setting out with a new commander, Flavius Silva, in 73 AD. This force now marched south, intent on terminating the last of the Jewish resistance. In 73 AD, Masada, the impregnable mountain fortress in the Judean desert, stood as the final holdout against the onslaught of Rome's legions. The siege that followed would mark the final, bloody suppression of the Jewish revolt, with an encounter whose awe-inspiring remains can still be seen in the desert today. Masada lies 2.4 kilometers from the Dead Sea on a barren, flat-topped limestone mountain amidst a desolate landscape. On its eastern side, the summit rises 140 meters above the desert floor, roughly half the height of the Eiffel Tower. Here, a tortuous, zigzagging trail known as the Serpent Path makes its way to the top. By comparison, the western approach is more assailable, and yet even this side towers 80 meters above the surrounding landscape, the approximate height of the Statue of Liberty. As if natural defenses weren't enough, the cleared plateau at the top was ringed with a 1,400-meter-long casemate wall standing 6 meters tall. The wall design was such that it was actually made of 2 parallel layers with a central gap that could be filled with stones or dirt during a siege. Such walls were common in antiquity, as they were cheaper and faster to construct, while also doubling as storage space. In the case of Masada, the outer wall was 1.4 meters thick, and the inner was 1 meter, making for a combined width of 4 meters. The walls were reinforced by 30 towers, spaced out for topographic and strategic reasons. These were generally 6 meters wide and 20 meters tall, with stairs leading to the top. The entire defensive structure could only be crossed at 4 points: the Snake Path Gate, the Water Gate, the Western Gate, and the Cistern Gate. As with all impregnable fortresses, the Achilles heel of any defense would be access to food and water for the defenders. However, Masada was well prepared in this respect. Cut into the rock were numerous cisterns and reservoirs. 12 were constructed in 2 rows along the northwestern slopes, with a total capacity of 40,000 cubic meters or 16 Olympic pools. Buildings also dotted the top of the plateau, with a series of long storehouses built into the northern complex. These could hold large quantities of corn, oil, wine, dates, and food supplies that would be preserved for long periods of time due to the naturally dry climate. Even if stockpiles began to run low, the open plateau area might be used to grow additional food. It's safe to say that a defensive force could expect to hold out indefinitely against just about any attacker. Unfortunately for the Jews, the Roman army wasn't your average foe. Ultimately, the Romans decided to turn the rocky cliffside into a gradual highway for an assault. To do this, the engineers would build an enormous siege ramp by taking advantage of a natural spur called the White Rock on the western side of the mountain. The plan was to bridge the existing gulf up to the walls with the man-made 20-degree incline. To support a ramp of this scale, the base had to be huge, so as not to collapse under its own weight, and was started roughly 200 meters out from the cliff. Here, the 10th Fretensis took the lead in construction, while Jewish prisoners were used to bring a continual stream of water and supplies to the camps. Day in and day out, they slowly added more and more material to the foundation. At first, the volume being added would do little to increase the height of the ramp, but as the days, weeks, and months rolled by, it only grew faster and faster. The sheer audacity of the construction project must have awed the defenders, who woke up every morning to a mountain slowly rising towards their walls. However, as the ramp got closer and closer, it meant that workers were more and more vulnerable to projectiles launched from the walls and towers above. In response, the Romans surely would have begun to erect temporary walls and sheds to cover their progress. Additional archers and artillery may also have been called up to provide covering fire for the work crews and to dissuade counterattacks. Within 2 months, the ramp to the fortress was complete. It measured 220 meters wide at its base, rose 90 meters, and was topped with a 20-meter stone pier nearest the wall. According to archaeologists, this obscenely large amount of earthwork weighed the equivalent of 1.5 times the Empire State Building. It is stunning to imagine that this was accomplished without the use of modern equipment. As the sun rose over Masada on the 3rd of May, the 10th Fretensis Legion stormed through the wall and burst out onto the plateau. Rather than being met by screams and shouts, however, they faced a deafening silence. The complex was filled with bodies of dead Jews. According to the historian Josephus, the defenders had accepted the inevitability of their fate and chosen death rather than capture. The grisly details of this mass suicide were apparently recounted by the handful of women and children who evaded the slaughter. More recent historical findings, however, have found discrepancies with Josephus' story and cast doubt on the final fate of the defenders. Nonetheless, the symbolism of a heroic Jewish last stand against oppressors lives on to this day and is a point of pride for the Israeli Defense Force recruits who take a vow never to let Masada fall again. The fall of Masada in 73 AD brought an end to the Great Jewish Revolt, which had raged on for 8 years. The land of Judea now became an independent Roman province under the administration of its own governor. Throughout the struggle, and especially at Masada, we were confronted with feelings of both great awe and sadness. The feats of engineering displayed by the Romans undeniably capture our imagination, and yet at the same time ring hollow in our hearts given the ultimately destructive purpose of these engines. For me, the Siege of Masada and its 2,000-year-old remains are a striking testament to the lengths our species will go to kill one another. As an admirer of the Roman war machine, this is a particularly important reminder of the field of corpses it left behind. Personal human tragedies rarely shine through the fog of history, and we would do well not to forget them. After all, one day, we will find ourselves in such books.